Hey everyone, I'm the Canadian lad, and today I watched the first episode of Loki at 0.2 Febic speed, and boy what an episode that was. The Timekeepers, the Multiverse, and Nexus events were all introduced within the first 15 minutes. So Kevin Feige wasn't lying when he said Loki was gonna make a super impact on the rest of the MCU. Now this is gonna be a complete breakdown plus my 0.2 Febic speed series. So I'm gonna go shot by shot, and if any scenes happen to have an Easter egg or a detail that I caught at 0.2 Febic speed, I'll explain that along the way. Now without any further ado, let's begin. This episode opens right where we left off in Avengers Endgame, where Tony Stark messes up and gives Loki an opportunity to escape from the timeline. We already saw Loki disguising himself as Steve Rogers in Avengers Endgame, but in today's episode we saw it from a different angle. Now what I reckon this might be some archived footage from Endgame, as Marvel shoots almost every scene with multiple cameras. But one thing to notice here is Chris Evans delivers this line a little bit differently than the one in Endgame, so this might be a retake from Endgame altogether. Anyway, Loki escapes to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. The Marvel logo appears, and I just love the way it incorporates the style of Loki with the color green and a slight touch of golden. Loki crash lands in the desert and is met by some of the locals, who questions him what is he doing here and where he came from. Now of course this whole thing could be a reference to Tony Stark, when he crash landed on a desert after being given a second chance, so this might be Loki's way of redemption. But notice how Loki immediately stood up on a rock so that he doesn't remain on the same level as regular humans. Wanting to stay above is something that he just inherited. Enters the TVA agents who are called Minutemen. They came here to arrest Loki, because he created a branch in reality and the TVA are like time cops. And notice the device that she uses is something that Mobius uses too later on in the episode, so it makes sense to say this is like a cell phone of the TVA. Now another detail here is that on the device, we can see it says timeline segment 616 and 432. This is a nod to the fact that Loki just escaped from Earth 616 timeline, which is the primary or sacred timeline in the MCU. Loki then gets taken away to the TVA along with the Tesseract that he stole. Now this one is one of my favorite details from this episode. Notice how the Tesseract dims considerably right after entering the TVA, whereas in the desert it was glowing really bright. We learn later in the episode that no powers are useful in the TVA, not even Infinity Stones.
Magic powers. They're no good in the TVA, Mr. Laufeyson.
So the Tesseract not glowing anymore already foreshadowed at the beginning that no such powers are gonna work here. Loki gets his clothes disintegrated and replaced with a prison jumpsuit.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
We are then introduced to the Timekeepers and the Multiversal War through some amazing animation. So basically there was a time when the multiverses fought each other, destroying literally everything. So the Timekeepers, who are all-knowing, intervened and brought peace to the multiverse by bringing it all together under one sacred timeline. They're the ones who protect and preserve the proper flow of time. And we also learned that when someone deviates from their original path, it creates a Nexus event. And we learned in WandaVision that Scarlet Witch is in fact a Nexus being. Nexus beings are rare individual entities with the ability to affect probability and thus the future, thereby altering the flow of the universal time stream. Now I'm not sure if Nexus being and Nexus event are both the same thing, but I don't think so. The idea that the multiverses fought each other causing there to be one timeline has me so intrigued with Secret War's implications. It alludes to a previous Secret War, and hints that if there's madness in the multiverse, there could be another. At one point in the animation it shows an image of the two armies clashing. Now the one on the left appears to be Kree, and the force on the right is possibly the Nova Corps. Based on the ruins in the background, the battle is taking place on Thanos' home planet of Titan. In the Guardians of the Galaxy, Ronan confirmed that Kree and Nova Corps were at war for 1,000 years. Moving on.
Left unchecked, could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
Notice how Marvel used the words madness and multiverse in the same sentence, already setting the stage for the Doctor Strange sequel. We then see the title card, that again alludes to the fact of multiple Lokis appearing in the series. Cut to Mobius and Mobius, who is investigating a crime scene where multiple TVA agents were killed. Looking at the way they were stabbed and the positioning of their dead bodies, Mobius assumes it's Loki who's killing them. Not our Loki, a Loki from a different timeline. He then comes across this child who was afraid and trying to escape, but Mobius calms her down and asks if she knows who killed them. She then simply pointed at this mural of the devil, and I was like, oh, here we go again with all those Mephisto theories. Now Mobius claims to be chasing an alternate version of Loki, and it's most likely that the child has mistaken the God of Mischief's famous horned helmet for the demonic horns of the devil. But you know what, I've been saying this and I will say it again, my bet was never on Mephisto appearing in WandaVision. I've been rooting for the villain Nightmare instead. But the good thing is Loki director Kate Herron has actually confirmed that Mephisto will not appear in the show. But is she lying though, like the Russos did with Endgame? I don't think so. Mobius then finds his bubblegum from from her that isn't from any established brand from the Marvel Comics as far as I know, but looking at the packet, blue and purple with the face on the side are suspicious. The face looks like Nightmare, a persistent villain from Doctor Strange comics. So is he a secret villain in the show? I guess we'll find out. Mobius then gets handed over a file with all the information about Loki. It states his real name is Loki Laufeyson instead of Odinson, which they put in his other aliases. It also has Frost Giants as his race. It notes his sex is fluid. It also says his sector is 1900 and 2099, which alludes to Marvel's line of future comics from the 1990s, which were set in the year 2099, and featured futuristic versions of Marvel heroes like Spider-Man, Punisher, and the X-Men. So this intake form is enough to tell that the TVA knows more about Loki than anyone else ever will. Loki is then brought in front of Judge Rabona Renslayer for his trial. Now notice in the background, one of the agents on the mural looks quite a bit like Stan Lee. None of them have glasses or big mustache except him, which is very similar to Stan Lee. Now let's talk about the Timekeeper's logo on the wall of the courtroom. It's an hourglass with dots on both sides. An hourglass represents time, and if you turn it sideways, you can see an infinity symbol, which means that this organization is charged with preserving the proper flow of time for all eternity. But does this logo resemble a face? More specifically, it kind of resembles how Kang the Conqueror's face is drawn in the comics. So don't be surprised if Kang shows up in this series. Judge Renslayer then asks Loki if he pleads guilty or not guilty, but Loki gets into an argument that the Avengers should be here instead of him, as it was them who traveled through time and caused Loki to escape with the Tesseract. But Renslayer says the Avengers were always meant to travel back in time, but what Loki did wasn't supposed to happen.
Right.
So how did Loki figure out the Avengers travel back in time from the future?
Oh, believe me, you can smell the cologne of two Tony Starks.
So it was Tony's cologne that gave it away. I mean, come on, we're talking about Loki here. He has senses regular people don't. But even though he did manage to deduce the time heist, one thing he got wrong here is this.
They traveled through time, no doubt in a last-ditch effort to stave off my ascent to God King.
This Loki thinks the Avengers went back in time to prevent him from winning, not seeing the bigger picture or the bigger stake. The judge then sentences Loki to be reset, but Mobius intervenes and rescues him. It's because Mobius plans on using this Loki to defeat alternate Lokis from other timelines. So think about it, when the TVA needs your assistance to defeat some evil gods, just how evil are they? Mobius then takes Loki away from the courtroom, and Loki experiences the beauty of the TVA. Now notice in the center we can see a statue of the Timekeepers literally holding the flow of time together. So it's fair to say that the Timekeepers are a little bit of show-off. I mean, I understand they do one hell of a job, but they don't miss any chance to show off, do they? Loki then says to Mobius this place is a nightmare, but listen to what Mobius says.
This place is a nightmare.
That's another department. Now that department I'll help you burn down.
That's another department. I imagine what that means. Could be yet another subtle reference to the villain Nightmare. We have had several other references of Nightmare in WandaVision. Had none in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but again with Loki we start to see those rumors coming back once again. Loki and Mobius get onto this elevator and the camera pans on the buttons. Now these are not just some random numbers. These are basically the floor numbers that they have at the TVA. In fact, we got an even better view in one of the early teasers. Mobius takes Loki in the time theater to show him what he did in the past and how his life would have been had he not escaped. But notice just before entering the time theater, Mobius very quickly signals the guard to hand him over a weapon. So he's taking this as a precaution because he's about to be alone in a room with the God of Mischief. I think that's a very plausible detail right there. Loki asks Mobius how come he never heard of the TVA if they're such powerful entities. Mobius explains it's because you never needed to because you always followed your set path. But Loki just cannot fathom the idea of him living his life according to someone else's decree. Mobius and Loki have a long conversation, where Loki finally unveils his plan of ruling Midgard along with Asgard and the Nine Realms. So essentially he wants to rule everything. Mobius thinks Loki is a murderer, but Loki thinks he's a liberator. He thinks freedom of choice is the biggest lie that there is. And I'm just loving this chemistry between Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston.
Makes you sound super smart.
I am smart.
I know. Okay.
They both just act off of each other, it's brilliant. Then we learn Loki is DB Cooper. Now for anyone who doesn't feel like googling, it is one of America's weird unsolved mysteries. In 1971, a man in a business attire boarded a commercial plane in Portland under the name DB Cooper. He claimed to have a bomb in his briefcase and hijacked the plane. At his command, the plane landed again, and the passengers were released in exchange for a parachute and $200,000, which is over $1 million in today's money. The plane then took off again under Cooper's direction, with the passengers now released. Only the crew and Cooper were aboard. Now about 30 minutes after takeoff, he jumped from the plane. No one has seen or heard from him ever since. No one knows who he is or was, where he went, where he came from or anything. But the authorities did discover some bills of the Columbia River, and that's why when Loki gets sucked into the Bifrost, he leaves a few notes behind. Loki being D.B. Cooper was in the initial trailer, but it's amazing they actually gave a decent amount of attention to it. This might be the best joke in the whole MCU. Loki then gets emotional, seeing that he's the reason his mother dies, but he still refuses to accept the reality. Mobius explains to him that he wasn't born to be a king. He was born to cause pain and suffering, just so others can be the best versions of themselves. Now let me give you a little bit of perspective here. Imagine someone as powerful as the TVA comes up to you and says no matter how much good you want to do in your life, it won't mean anything, because you're here to cause destruction. Wouldn't that break your heart, knowing that you'll be nothing but a pain to others no matter what you do? That is exactly what Loki went through in this episode. Now Hunter B-15 enters the room and interrupts them. She came here to tell Mobius that they lost another unit to evil Loki. But at 0.2 Febic speed, I found my favorite detail from this episode. At this point, we all know Loki stole the time twister from Mobius in order to escape from the TVA. But in slow motion, I actually spotted when exactly he stole it. When Loki was on the floor, heartbroken, seeing his mother dying on the screen, Mobius offered his hand to get Loki back on his feet. Now notice, as soon as Loki gets back up, he steals the time twister from Mobius. Let's watch it in slow motion and we'll see it together. Here we can see Loki focusing on the target while getting back on his feet. But pay attention to his left hand, which is already reaching towards Mobius's pocket. Now the camera angle changes, but we can still understand what's happening there. And there he successfully steals the time twister. And here you can clearly see him putting it back in his own pocket. So even without any of his powers, Loki's sleight of hand is still second to none. Loki goes to Casey in order to obtain the Tesseract, so that he can teleport himself out of here. But here he sees something that he couldn't even imagine in his worst nightmare. The TVA uses Infinity Stones as fucking paperweights. The cruelest barb in the entire MCU. You can pinpoint the exact moment Loki's heart breaks in half. I mean, not just his heart breaking, but it's the very moment he believes the TVA is a real thing and not an illusion. It was the perfect way to show him how minuscule he is. I mean, it's crazy to even think that we have had 3 phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe revolving around the Infinity Stones, and Phase 4 begins by telling us that the stones to some people are nothing more than paperweights. That's how massive Phase 4 is gonna be. Now, one detail I found in this scene is notice there were more time stones in the desk than any other Infinity Stones. It makes sense though, because the TVA mostly deals with time and the flow of time. And notice Casey also doesn't use any regular wristwatch, which is kinda obvious, but I'm glad they didn't forget to give him a weird watch. Loki finally accepts the TVA is a real thing, and wonders if this is the greatest power in the universe. Now Hunter B-15 almost catches him, and he escapes from there again, but this time he didn't try to run away. Instead, he came back to the time theater. Loki, realizing whatever Mobius said is true, now he himself watches how his life is going to unfold. He sees the death of Odin, how he and Thor become good friends, and eventually sees his own death at the hands of Thanos. I don't think there was anything smarter than letting Loki himself be the one to see how his story ends in the original timeline. It confirmed that the original Loki is 100% dead. Then the film runs out of the holo projector. Now if you watch closely as it passes by the camera, you'll notice it says Loki Laufeyson, who's from Earth 616. Tom Hiddleston did a phenomenal job with his acting here. I'm so happy Marvel is finally able to give actors an opportunity to showcase their talent. They did it with WandaVision, with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now again with Loki. We then see a couple of posters. Always watching the sacred timeline, and Nexus events must be pruned. I'm telling you lads, the props team did some amazing job in this one. Cuts back to Loki and Mobius, where Loki finally admits this.
It's the cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear.
So when Loki said the same to Mobius at the beginning, he was actually describing himself. That's why he was thinking so little of the TVA, because he thought the TVA is just as desperate for control as he was. But Mobius offers him something to live for. He asks Loki to help TVA catch a fugitive variant who has been killing TVA agents. Loki asks why him, why not anybody else? And that's when he learns the other fugitive variants are also him, just different versions. Cut to Oklahoma, where the TVA found another variant. Now this is probably female Loki, but take this with a grain of salt. Although when she burns all the TVA agents to the ground, we can see her fingerless gloves. From the set photos, it does look like Sofia Di Martino's character, who's probably playing female Loki. And notice at the beginning of the episode, this Loki said he will burn TVA to the ground, which he didn't. But this evil one definitely did. This marks a fine line between these two. But the question is, how long will Loki comply? How long will he remain on the good side? I mean, who knows if this Loki realized that the only way to be the king of the universe is to conquer the TVA by joining them and then conquering them. One thing I learned after watching this character for so many years is to never trust Loki again. And that's it. This would be my breakdown of the first episode of Loki at 0.2 Febic speed. I hope I managed to give you lads some new details from this episode. If I did, then please give me a thumbs up, grab the subscribe button and turn notifications on. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter to get updates about my videos. Till then, I'll see you lads in the next one. Oh, just before I end this video, when Hunter B-15 smacked Loki in the face, he fell on the ground at 1/16th of speed, but felt the pain in real time. And if you think about it, Loki got Hulk smashed and smacked in the face in less than an hour on the same day.